The courtroom was silent. No whispers, no movement, not even the sound of someone shifting in their seat. Everyone was waiting for the same thing: a defense, an excuse, a denial. But the man standing in front of the judge didn't give any of those. Instead, he looked calmly toward the jury and said something that would send chills through the entire room. "I'm a serial killer." He paused. Then he added something even more disturbing. "I'm Michael Myers." For a moment, nobody reacted. The families of the victims stared at him in disbelief. The jurors looked confused. Even the lawyers seemed stunned by what they had just heard. Because this wasn't a movie. This wasn't fiction. This was a real courtroom in Memphis, Tennessee. And the man speaking was Joshua Dodson. But the terrifying story behind those words didn't start in that courtroom. It started years earlier. Joshua Dodson grew up in Memphis. Very little about his childhood has been made public. There are no detailed interviews from family members and very few official reports describing his early life. But there is one thing investigators agree on. Joshua Dodson began attracting police attention at a very young age. By the age of 14, his name was already appearing in police records. Fights, disturbances, aggressive behavior. At first, they seemed like the kinds of incidents many troubled teenagers get involved in. But as the years passed, the pattern became more worrying. The reports became more serious, and officers who encountered him began to notice something unsettling. Joshua Dodson had a violent streak that seemed to grow stronger over time. Still, nothing at that point suggested he would one day become connected to multiple murders. That nightmare had not begun yet, but it was coming. The day started like any other in South Memphis. Cars moved slowly along Elvis Presley Boulevard. Small neighborhood stores opened their doors for the day. People stopped to buy snacks, drinks, or cigarettes before heading back home. Among them was an 18-year-old young man named Divian Parker. He was standing outside a small convenience store. To this day, no one knows exactly why he was there. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he had just stepped outside for a moment. Whatever the reason, nothing about that moment suggested danger. Then suddenly, gunshots. Witnesses heard multiple shots echo through the parking lot. The entire incident happened in seconds. People ducked. Some ran inside the store. Others froze in shock. When the gunfire stopped, Divian Parker was lying on the ground, bleeding, severely wounded. Emergency services arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed to save him. But despite their efforts, the young man was pronounced dead at the scene. He was only 18 years old. For his family, the loss was devastating. For investigators, the case was frustrating, because almost immediately they encountered a problem. There were no clear suspects, no weapon recovered, and very little reliable witness information. Even more confusing, there was no clear motive. This didn't appear to be a robbery. There was no known argument beforehand. It looked like a completely random act of violence. The investigation remained open. Days passed, weeks passed, then months, but the case remained unsolved. Meanwhile, the person responsible was still out there. And worse, he wasn't finished. Nearly 6 months after the murder of Divian Parker, Memphis had begun to move on. The tragedy was still remembered by family and friends, but without new leads, the case had grown cold. But somewhere in the city, the man responsible was preparing to strike again. On May 24th, 2020, the area near Jesse Turner Park was quiet. It was a typical neighborhood park. Children played there. Families visited on weekends. Neighbors walked through the area during the day. On that afternoon, 2 people were nearby, Rita Bennett and Reginald Anderson. Neither of them had any reason to believe they were in danger. Then Joshua Dodson approached. Exactly what happened next remains unclear. Witnesses later described a sudden confrontation. Voices raised, tension building quickly, then chaos. Reginald Anderson realized something was wrong. He turned and tried to run, but Dodson pulled out a gun and fired. Reginald was struck by the bullets as he tried to escape. Rita Bennett was also hit during the shooting. When emergency responders arrived, both victims were critically injured. They were rushed for medical treatment. But just like the case months earlier, it was already too late. Both victims died from their injuries. The neighborhood was stunned. 2 people killed in broad daylight, near a public park. And once again, the killer disappeared. At this point, people in Memphis began asking questions. 3 murders, no arrests, no clear suspect. Rumors began spreading through the community. Some people wondered if the crimes were connected. Others feared there might be a random killer moving through the city. But investigators still lacked enough evidence to link the cases together. And while the fear slowly spread across Memphis, something even worse was about to happen. because the next victim would be someone who knew Joshua Dodson personally, someone who trusted him, someone carrying his child. By June 2020, tension in Memphis had grown. 3 murders remained unsolved, but the crime that would finally reveal the truth was about to happen inside a home. The victim was Joshua Dodson. She was 19 years old, young, full of plans for the future, and 6 months pregnant. The father of her unborn child was Joshua Dodson. According to later reports, their relationship was unstable. Arguments were frequent. Friends described a toxic environment filled with jealousy and tension. On June 12, 2020, Joshua was at home when another argument began. At first, the conflict seemed small. It reportedly started over a message on social media, but the situation escalated quickly. Voices grew louder. The argument became more aggressive. Then Joshua realized something terrifying. Joshua Dodson had a gun. Fearing for her life, she ran to another room. She closed the door behind her. It was a simple act of protection, but it showed one thing clearly. She was afraid. On the other side of the door, Dodson didn't calm down. Instead, he fired a shot. The bullet tore through the door. Miraculously, Joshua wasn't hit. But the message was clear. The situation had crossed a dangerous line. Then suddenly, Dodson left the house. For a brief moment, Joshua may have believed the worst was over. Maybe he had finally walked away. Maybe the argument had ended. But only a few hours later, he came back, and this time he opened fire. When emergency responders arrived, Joshua was rushed to the hospital. Doctors fought desperately to save her life, but the injuries were too severe. Joshua Dodson died, and so did her unborn child. The news spread quickly across Memphis. A pregnant teenager murdered in her own home. The community was devastated, angry, heartbroken, but what happened next shocked investigators even more. Because only 2 hours after the murder, Joshua Dodson posted something on Facebook. Just 2 words, "Fly high," as if he were mourning her death, as if he were not responsible. For detectives, that post was deeply disturbing. But more importantly, it helped confirm their suspicions. The evidence was finally pointing clearly toward one person, Joshua Dodson, and this time, police were determined to find him. After the murder, Dodson disappeared. For several days, he avoided police. Authorities issued a statewide alert. He was officially considered armed and extremely dangerous. A reward was offered for information. Investigators worked around the clock following every possible lead. Then finally, a tip came in. Joshua Dodson had been located outside Memphis. Police moved quickly. Officers surrounded the area. And when they approached him, something unexpected happened. He didn't fight. He didn't run. Joshua Dodson surrendered without resistance. He was arrested and transported back to Memphis. But even behind bars, his behavior continued to disturb authorities. According to jail reports, Dodson quickly gained a reputation for being aggressive and unpredictable. He threatened other inmates. He challenged guards. He became involved in multiple incidents. And throughout all of it, he showed no remorse, no sadness, no regret. For the families of the victims, this behavior only made the situation more painful. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. And after years of waiting, the trial finally began in 2024. 4 years after the murders, the courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the seats. Families of the victims sat together in silence. Everyone wanted to hear the truth. The prosecution presented its evidence. Witness testimonies, physical evidence, timelines connecting Dodson to the crimes. The case against him was strong. Many believed the outcome was already certain. But then Joshua Dodson did something unexpected. He asked to speak. When he took the stand, many people expected him to deny the accusations or blame someone else. But instead, he confessed. He admitted to killing Joshua Dodson and her unborn child. Then he went further. He confessed to 3 more murders. Vivian Parker, Rita Bennett, Reginald Anderson. The courtroom froze. But what came next was even more shocking. Dodson looked toward the court and calmly said, "I am a serial killer." Then he added, "I'm Michael Myers." The statement stunned everyone. Michael Myers is the fictional killer from the Halloween horror movies, a character known for being emotionless, silent, and unstoppable. By comparing himself to that character, Dodson seemed to be turning the courtroom into a stage. Observers later described his behavior as disturbing. He showed no empathy, no sadness, no guilt. At times during the trial, the judge even noted that Dodson appeared to fall asleep during the proceedings, as if the entire trial meant nothing to him. When the jury finally left to deliberate, the decision came quickly. Very quickly, it took only 45 minutes. The verdict, guilty. During sentencing, the judge reviewed everything. His violent history, the brutality of the crimes, his lack of remorse, and his dangerous behavior even in custody. Then the final sentence was announced. 261 years in prison. No possibility of parole. At just 25 years old, Joshua Dodson understood the reality. He would spend the rest of his life behind prison walls. Today, the city of Memphis still remembers the case. 5 lives were lost. Families were shattered. A community was traumatized. Joshua Dodson never offered a real explanation for his actions. No motive, no justification, only a disturbing desire for attention and violence. And one sentence that continues to haunt those who heard it. I'm a serial killer. I am Michael Myers. But unlike the movies, this story was real. Subscribe for more.